recording. Okay, three threats that Iran poses to the world. So the first one we talked about it earlier with a nuclear threat, right? The fact that they could use a nuclear weapon. That is without a doubt the scariest and most important reason why Iran must be stopped. But if we ignore the nuclear things and say, well, let's say we were able to solve the nuclear problem. Let's say we had some sort of a deal that ensured us that we had nothing to worry about when it came to Iran's nuclear weapons program. We didn't have to worry about that threat. Is there anything else that we have to worry about with Iran? The answer is a definitive yes. 100% yes, there is something else that we have to worry about. And that is that Iran is slowly creeping to have regional control over the Middle East. Now, it's different than, let's say, the Soviet Union. When the Soviet Union took over the Eastern Bloc countries in Europe, and you had the Iron Curtain that went through Europe. So it was blatantly obvious to everybody that these were Soviet satellites, that this was part of the Soviet Union. It is not the same whatsoever with the way that Iran conducts its control over the region. What they do is they develop proxies, they fund these proxies, and by funding these proxies, they have control over the proxies' actions. Their goal then is to take the proxies and then have them enter the political sphere of the country. It's not enough for them to just be a militia that threatens the country, but they want to actually enter into the political leadership of the country and therefore become the decision makers of the policies and the politics of those countries. So just to take an example of Hezbollah in Lebanon. Hezbollah was a small terrorist entity, a small terrorist group that Iran began funding. Then convinced Hezbollah's military leadership to then provide social services to the country. So they provided social services that Lebanon, the government, wasn't providing its people. And then it began to put up elected officials or elected candidates for office within Lebanon. Today, Hezbollah, besides being the military power in control over the southern Lebanon, from the Litani River down to Israel's border, which is about 20 miles of space. That's the area that Israel used to occupy from 1982 until the year 2000. When they left, it created a vacuum. Hezbollah moved in. So besides being the military leadership or the military control of that area, the Lebanese army is not found there. But they also then had candidates run for office, and they are 40% of Lebanon's parliament today. 40% of the parliament in Lebanon. That's the equivalent of a little less than the Republican Party in the United States, if you take a comparison between the two. They are able to develop policy within Lebanon. That's astounding. So if Hezbollah is taking orders from Iran and Hezbollah is within the political policy leadership of Lebanon, first of all, it's understandable why Lebanon is a completely inept country today. Its people are suffering starvation when it used to be the Riviera of the Middle East, and it used to be a beautiful vacation spot with a rich and safe country. It's understandable why, since Hezbollah came to power now, it's not anymore, and it serves as a serious problem to Lebanon. But also recognizing the fact that Iran now controls Lebanon. When Syria became problematic for the Syrian leadership, so then what you began to have is Hezbollah moving into Syria and Iran now having control over much of what happens in Syria. That's another problem. Then you had Iraq. When American soldiers started pulling out of Iraq, Iran started moving in with its proxies. So, and what's happening now is Iran is trying to create sort of a rainbow over the entire Middle East. If you had a map of the Middle East and traced its influence, you would see it moving from country to country, sort of creating this curve over the entire Middle East of its influence. That's bad for the world, because Iran does not have the same values as the rest of the world. And as they take over more and more countries, these countries begin to take on Iranian values, which is not pro-West at all. The last thing that we're worried about, the last threat that Iran poses, is the fact that they are the largest state sponsor of terrorism. This has been Year after year, when the State Department comes out with its reports on terrorism, it consistently lists Iran as the largest state sponsor of terror, and Iran is famous for the bombing of Marines in Beirut in 1982. That was their action. The bombing of the JCC in Argentina in 1994. There are various terrorist acts, and in Iraq. And this is difficult for me to say, so I apologize if I'm not as articulate as I would like to be. But in the autopsies of American soldiers that were killed in Iraq, the bullets pulled out of their bodies were Iranian bullets. Not that they were fired from Iranian soldiers, but Iran was the one sponsoring this terrorism that was going on. What's happening in Yemen today is all Iranian sponsored. So Iran is a state sponsor of terror. So in order to neutralize the Iranian threat, it's not enough just to address the Iranian nuclear weapons program. You also must address these other two issues of its attempts to create regional control and its sponsoring of terror. Okay.